Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as you well know, I come to the floor each week with a doctor's second opinion, and it specifically relates to the health care law, the law that was passed now over a year ago with many promises made by the President, one of which was that if you like your coverage, you can keep it. We now know that's not the case, as he had promised. He also talked about this driving down the cost of health care, and we've seen the cost of health care going up. Last week I came to the Senate floor, Mr. President, and talked about the something that's not really known very well. It's a part of this law. It's called the so-called Independent Payment Advisory Board. And I gave 5 specifics as to problems with this board. So today I'd like to give another 5. And I think these are things that every single American needs to know about the mandates that are part of this health care law and what's going to happen to them as more and more components and parts of this health care law are implemented. This is called, people refer to it as IPAB, IPAB, not an iPod, but an IPAB, and it stands for the so-called Independent Payment Advisory Board. But I'll tell you, this is a Washington board. It is not independent, and I believe it's going to be very harmful in terms of the health of the American people. This board often goes unnoticed, and one of the reasons is it actually doesn't become operational until after the 2012 elections, until 2013. But it is an extremely powerful and extremely dangerous part of the President's health care law. It's a Washington board. It empowers 15 unelected and unaccountable bureaucrats, 15 full-time Washington bureaucrats who will decide how Medicare dollars are spent. These Washington bureaucrats will use basically price controls, and they will use price controls to ration medical care and services all across the country. You know, you remember, Mr. President, when then Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi said first you had to pass the bill before you got to find out what was in it. Well, now as more and more Americans learn about this rationing board, they will again voice their opposition to the President's health care law. I will tell you, Mr. President, I want to pick up today where I left off last week. I'm going to share with the American people an additional 5 things that they need to know about this board. And the number 1 thing today is that the President wants to keep this board under the radar. He and his administration simply want to disguise the long-term impact that this board's price controls will have on our seniors on Medicare. If he does so successfully, well, the patients on Medicare will be the big losers. You know, he wants to promise the American people that the board will achieve great Medicare savings. But he doesn't want to explain to the American people exactly what those Medicare cuts will do and how the American people will ultimately pay the price in their health care. The President and Washington Democrats have historically supported policies giving government the power to set health care prices. But make no mistake, the President is using this Washington board as a Trojan horse to accomplish that goal. This is exactly why this board is not going to be set up until after the 2012 elections. The American people will not face the true impact of this board and the cuts that it's going to have on their loved ones until after the presidential election next year. The President's plan depends entirely on keeping the true purpose of this rationing board well below the radar. Here's a second concern, and that is that the opposition to the President's Payment Advisory Board, interestingly enough, is bipartisan. Even members of the President's own party know that creating a Washington board to cut Medicare payments and ration medical services is bad policy when it comes to our seniors. Even Representative Pete Stark of California, ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee in the House, and is on the Health Subcommittee, said April of this year, New York Times article, quote, In its effort to limit the growth of Medicare spending, the board is likely to set inadequate payment rates for health care providers, which could endanger patient care. There you have a member of ranking stature, Democrat Party in the House. Now let's take a look at what someone else said. She announced her support for legislation which would repeal the President's Payment Advisory Board. This is Representative Allison Schwartz of Pennsylvania. Now, actually, she's a strong champion for the health care law. She's also vice chairman of the New Democrat Coalition, and she had a statement that came out April 15, 2011, Income Tax Day, saying, Congress is a representative body and must assume responsibility for legislating sound health care policy for Medicare beneficiaries, including those policies related to the payment systems. Abdicating this responsibility undermines our ability to represent our constituents. She goes on to say, I cannot condone the implementation of a flawed policy that will risk beneficiary access to care. Third, the President's Payment Advisory Board, it sets prices and it gives Washington more power, not patients. In most cases, Medicare payments to doctors, and members of the Senate, both parties understand this, are already well below market rates. That is why doctors often limit the number of Medicare patients that they see. In more severe cases, doctors stop treating new Medicare patients. Well, allowing a rationing board unlimited power to control Medicare prices, it's only going to drive Medicare payments lower, and it's going to drive more doctors away from seeing Medicare patients. And my concern is that the prices are going to be driven so low by this rationing board that the government will force doctors, hospitals, and other medical providers to stop offering any care to Medicare patients. Random and punishing cuts to Medicare provider payments won't make this program any more efficient, won't make people's health care better, but it will reduce the supply of medical care to our seniors on Medicare. The Washington Board's ability to set prices gives it unprecedented control over personal medical decisions, and that's wrong. Those decisions should be left to the patient and his or her doctor alone, without the interference of 15 Washington bureaucrats. No Washington bureaucrat should ever have the right to stand between a patient and his or her doctor. At its core, the debate about the President's Payment Advisory Board centers around a few questions. Do the American people want a Washington board of unelected people that they don't know making their personal health care choices for them? Or do they want to have the freedom and the choice to make their own health care decisions? And do they want the members of Congress, the people that they send to Washington, to be able and to be held accountable? Do they want those members of Congress to explain exactly what spending cuts are being discussed and need to be made to ensure Medicare's solvency? As you know, Mr. President, we all heard just last week Medicare is going to be bankrupt even 5 weeks faster than it had been thought in the past. Interestingly enough, and this is number 4, Mr. President, President Obama doubles down on on the President's Payment Advisory Board. In his April 13th spending speech to the nation, he doubled down on his commitment to this Washington rationing board. In the speech, he said he actually wants to give the board more power to slash Medicare payments to providers. Apparently, expanding his rationing board is one of the only tangible proposals that the President has to reform Medicare and reduce the debt. The American people sent us here to confront our financial and fiscal crisis head-on and to come up with solutions to solve the problem. They didn't send us here to cower behind boards and commissions and empty promises. They asked us to come to Washington with the courage, the strength, and the political will, Mr. President, to make tough spending decisions. Rather than stand up to the challenge, the President chose to go all in, placing his bet on 15 bureaucrats yet to be identified. He asked the American people to trust him that this rationing board will squeeze out Medicare savings. At the same time, not impacting, he says, our seniors' access to medical care. But I don't think this is a bet that our nation's seniors should take or should be willing to take. And finally, Mr. President, number 5, members of my party, the Republicans, are working to repeal the President's Payment Advisory Board. Senate Republicans are taking a stand against this rationing board, against more government control. Senator John Cornyn of Texas has introduced Senate Bill 668. It is the Health Care Bureaucrats Elimination Act. This bill repeals the President's Payment Advisory Board, ensuring Medicare patients can get the care they need from the doctor that they choose. And I'm proud to be a co-sponsor, an original co-sponsor of this piece of legislation. And that's why, Mr. President, I come to you today again on the floor with a doctor's second opinion as somebody who for a quarter of a century in Wyoming has taken care of patients on Medicare, many patients on Medicare, to provide a doctor's second opinion that this health care law is bad for those patients. It's bad for providers, the nurses and doctors who take care of those patients, and it's bad for the taxpayers. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Texas is recognized.
Mr. President, I'm glad I was here on the floor to hear the distinguished senator from Wyoming's comments about the Independent Payment Advisory Board, which is Washington, D.C. gobbledygook, which translates into rationing board, which is going to limit seniors' access to care, as he so ably described. And I appreciate him talking about that. It's a topic I will raise in a moment and as part of my remarks, but I want to express my appreciation to him for his remarks. My larger concern today is about our budget, the federal budget. As one of our colleagues across the aisle told the media this week, he said he looks forward to voting on the Republican budget. Well, that may seem a little odd because this is the Senate, and actually the Senate doesn't have a budget. The Budget Committee on which I serve has not met to consider a proposal by the chairman of the Budget Committee, and we haven't had a chance to offer amendments to vote on it and then for it to come to the Senate floor so then we would have a Senate budget to vote on. What he was talking about, of course, was he's looking forward to voting on the House budget. But I would say that the Senate has not considered a budget for 750 days plus. No family, no business, no one in America, certainly no state, can operate on in this sort of fiscally irresponsible manner. Only the federal government. And now, where are we? We're spending 43 cents out of every dollar, which is borrowed money, borrowed from our kids and grandkids. And the fact of the matter, a newborn baby born into this world today inherits $46,000 in debt because we haven't had the courage to meet this challenge as we must. Well, my colleague also said that this is going to be one of the defining issues of 2012, which is, by the way, is election year. I guess that what he means is this is going to be an election issue, and I think he's right, but not for the reasons that he suggested. But first, I just want to refresh everyone's memory. It was just in December of last year that the President's own bipartisan fiscal debt commission gave us a report and really a blueprint for what I think would be a responsible start to dealing with this debt crisis we find ourselves confronted with. That report, again, a bipartisan report, proposed $4 trillion in deficit reduction over 10 years. The report said federal health care spending represents our single largest fiscal challenge over the long run. As the baby boomers, people like me and the presiding officer, retire and get older, health care costs will grow faster than the economy. Federal health care spending threatens to balloon. Well, as if on cue, the Medicare trustees issued a report just this last month with even a starker warning. Medicare's trust fund will be insolvent in 2024, about 13 years from now. And the gap between the promises that Medicare has made to seniors and its funding or ability to fund or pay for those services is about $24 trillion. $24 trillion. That's the so-called unfunded liability of Medicare. And those estimates are, according to the chief actuary, an optimistic scenario, although it's hard to be optimistic about a $24 trillion unfunded liability. But we also know there have been other ominous warnings, both here at home and around the world. The International Monetary Fund, in a working paper last month, noted our potential debt crisis. The S&P rating agency downgraded its outlook for American debt, in other words, our ability to repay those bills, from stable to negative. And PIMCO, the world's largest bondholder, no longer is purchasing American bonds, choosing to purchase other type of investments, and that ought to be a warning to us. And if we needed any reminder, even the Communist Chinese Party have given an earful to visiting senators about our debt, which they happen to own about $1 trillion of. But they're worried about the value of their own investment, and hence, as Admiral Mullen said, we ought to realize that because of that situation, that, as Admiral Mullen pointed out, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he said the debt is the single largest national security issue facing America today. Well, despite these ominous warnings and even reports from the President's own Fiscal Commission, and a bipartisan one at that, the majority, Senator Reid, our friends across the aisle, simply aren't taking the fiscal situation seriously. In fact, the majority leader was quoted recently saying it would be foolish for the leadership of the other party, who controls the agenda on the floor and in committees, it would be foolish for them to propose a budget. And the White House has shown twice this year so far that it isn't really very serious about fiscal discipline. In February, the President proposed a budget that completely ignored his own deficit commission. It had $8.7 trillion in new spending, $1.6 trillion in new taxes, and an additional $13 trillion in debt. Well, at the time the President released his proposed budget, there were a number of my colleagues who were very impressed by it. Some called it responsible, others credible, others said it was a balanced approach, a good blueprint, a step forward, a careful evaluation, a solid starting point, and many other compliments as well. President Obama was so pleased with his budget proposal that he called it our Sputnik moment. But of course, we know his Sputnik failed to launch. None of my colleagues who he praised on the President's proposal were willing to pass a budget resolution or even take one up and have it be considered and voted on. So President Obama tried again in another big speech in April, when he was finally brought unwillingly to the debate on our budget and on our debt crisis. In that speech at Georgetown in April, he called for higher taxes as well as automatic tax increases that would kick in if certain conditions were met. He called for deeper cuts in defense spending. He invented a new 12-year budget window to disguise the large deficits that would otherwise appear if it were the traditional 10-year budget window. And then the President, I think beneath the dignity of his office, verbally abused the very people who had the courage to propose an alternative. And then, of course, we've heard the attacks he started, which have continued, the false attacks that Republicans want to, quote, end Medicare as we know it, close quote. Well, I will say that Republicans do not want to end Medicare as we know it. That is an intentional falsehood. That is a lie. Republicans do not want to end Medicare as we know it. We're simply trying to inject some cold, hard reality, as observed by the President's own debt commission, by the Medicare trustees, and everyone else who's taken a responsible look at the problem. What is that reality? Well, the reality is Medicare, as we know it, will end unless we do something to fix it and to save it. My colleagues want to talk about ending Medicare as we know it. Well, they have short memories, because it was these very same colleagues who took $500 billion out of Medicare to fund Obamacare. And they injected the rationing commission that my colleague from Wyoming just got through talking about, and which I'll mention again in a moment. Well, many seniors found out as a result of the health care bill that passed with only along party line vote, only Democratic votes in the Senate, that many seniors have already lost their access to Medicare Advantage. Other retirees have seen that their former employers have canceled their health care plans and found themselves dropped into the Medicare system. And it's never been explained to me how you can possibly cut $500 billion out of Medicare, which, as I said earlier, already has $24 trillion in unfunded liabilities. So you're exacerbating, you're making those liabilities worse, not better, to fund a new entitlement program. So I would ask, who's changed Medicare? Who's made it impossible for us to continue under the present course to keep that promise to our seniors? And why is it so important that we work together to try to come up with a solution to fix it? Well, just when you think that the debate could not stoop any lower and people could not act any more irresponsibly, we're confronted with political ads already about Republicans rolling a senior off a cliff in a wheelchair. Now, I know the American people are smart enough to figure that out. They realize that this is just an attack ad, and they're smart enough to look at the substance. But what we need is a real debate and a discussion and try to work together to try to solve our problems, not just sort of gotcha politics, the sort of things that people have come to loathe about Congress and Washington, D.C., not people working together to solve problems, but people playing gotcha and focus only on the next election, not on the next generation. Well, my colleague from Wyoming talked about the Independent Payment Advisory Board, and I realize that that is a mouthful, but it's bureaucratese, Washington speak, for an unelected, unaccountable group of bureaucrats, 15 of them, appointed, that will actually have the job of cutting payments to doctors and hospitals, which will have the practical impact of limiting seniors' access to Medicare benefits. What good is providing coverage to our seniors if they can't find a doctor or a hospital to treat them? Well, this is good old-fashioned, or I should say bad old-fashioned price controls, and they just don't work, because we've seen that already in Medicare. In my state alone, in Texas, about a third of doctors already limit their new Medicare patients, according to the Texas Medical Association. If you live in the rural parts of the state, it's really hard to find a doctor. And we know that the price controls of this rationing board will just make this trend worse and accelerate it, leading to longer wait times and harder to access treatments. If the board forces our seniors to wait longer for the life-saving treatment they need, does that change Medicare as we know it? Well, it surely changes Medicare as people have come to expect it and deserve it. Yet the President has done nothing but double down on this rationing board. You heard in his speech he made in April, the one I referred to a moment ago at Georgetown, he said we're going to extract in the first 10 years another $500 billion in savings from Medicare, and in the second 10 years another $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion sucked out of Medicare. I have to ask, what do you think that's going to do on people's access to a doctor and a hospital? That's the President's proposal or framework. It's not a budget. It's not the numbers that we're accustomed to considering and voting on, but that's his proposal. And if the President's proposal to cut $1.5 trillion out of Medicare over the next 2 decades doesn't change Medicare as we know it, then I don't know what does. Well, We know the House of Representatives has labored mightily to produce a budget, the so-called Ryan Plan. Many of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle relish the fact that they've stood back and waited for House Republicans to act responsibly, to try to wrestle with these problems, to confront them, to tell the truth to the American people about the problem, and then try to their dead-level best to meet those challenges and deal with them as responsible adults. But what do they get? Well, they get a kick in the teeth. They get attack ads on TV. Well, this will allow, under the House proposal, for us to fix Medicare and to save it. And right now it's on the road to bankruptcy and oblivion. And for the reasons I've observed and others, it will not work. Well, there are some on our side of the aisle and on the other side who may have some problems with the details of the proposed House budget. But the responsible answer to that is, well, let's take up and pass a budget in the Senate and give senators on the Budget Committee an opportunity to offer amendments that would improve it if they can, and then to bring it to the Senate floor and to do what we get paid for, which is to take on these hard problems, confront them, debate them, and then make the best decisions we can on behalf of the people we work for in our states and across the country. Well, I think some elements of the House budget have an awful lot of appeal. In fact, we've seen, based on the experience in Medicare Part D, that was the prescription drug plan that we passed earlier in the last decade, that by injecting some market forces and competition and transparency, we can actually bring down prices by increasing and increase quality of services. In fact, the Medicare prescription drug plan has come in 46% below what it was originally expected to cost. That's an example that we can learn from, and we can begin to implement in trying to bring down costs and yet not ration access to care. And indeed, the premium support model is advocated by many Democrats and Republicans, and is similar to how the federal government provides health insurance for federal employees, including members of Congress. Well, if it's good enough for Congress, why is it good enough to consider for the rest of the American seniors? So, do Republicans want to change Medicare as we know it? Well, we want to save it. We want to fix it. We want it to be there as a promise that we can keep, as opposed to a promise we cannot keep because it is on a path to bankruptcy and oblivion. So our friends across the aisle say, no, trust me, trust us. We're from the government. We'll fix it. And the way they want to do it is through draconian cuts to doctors and hospitals that will limit people's access to health care. We believe that transparency and choice and competition that worked in Medicare Advantage and the prescription drug program can work here as well. And you know what, Mr. President? If people disagree with me, I respect their right to disagree with me, but why aren't we having a responsible debate here on the floor of the Senate and voting on a budget, as opposed to the irresponsible rhetoric and the attack ads and the campaign already begun for 2012? And I'm talking about from the White House to the Congress. Well, I think some of my colleagues firmly believe in their heart of hearts, they've been listening to their political consultants, and they say the way to win the next election is to scare the living daylights out of our seniors. Well, I think that's irresponsible. People should resist the temptation to do that just in order to win an election to keep their job. Indeed, I find myself in agreement with some of the comments made by President Obama himself last summer. He said, we're not going to do anything to be able, he said, we're not going to be able to do anything about any of these entitlements if what we do is characterized, whatever proposals are put out there, as the other party is being irresponsible. The other party is trying to hurt seniors. The other party is trying to do X, Y, and Z. Well, I agree with what President Obama said, but that's not what we're hearing across the aisle and in the airwaves of America. That was the President's message in 2010. It's obviously changed a lot since 2012, since he began his own personal attack on the only responsible budget proposal that's been made in April. And unfortunately, I think it's a prematurely begun election campaign for 2012. It is an abdication of our responsibility to engage in this sort of gotcha politics without trying to take on and confront the problems. I don't think it's responsible to try to scare seniors for political points, but I don't think Republicans should also allow ourselves to be merely punching bags and let the other side characterize our motives or the seriousness of the problem that our country faces. What we need, Mr. President, is to resist the temptation to engage in this sort of gamesmanship and to try to do our dead-level best to fulfill our oath and to do our job as representatives of the American people. I think they would welcome that. But all we've seen so far with the attacks and the gotcha politics, I think will do nothing but earn their despise and contempt, and deservedly so. We can do better, and we need to try. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to speak as if in morning business for up to 10 minutes.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I rise today to discuss the budget. I have long believed that we need to get serious about this debt, about this deficit. I was listening to my colleague across the aisle, and I believe we have to be responsible in the way that we do it. That is why a year ago I was one of a handful of senators that fought for the creation of the Fiscal Debt Commission. In fact, a number of us came together and said we are going to get this debt commission or we won't vote for the debt ceiling increase. And as a result, while we couldn't get the statutory fiscal debt commission, we got the debt commission. I think a lot of people think it would just result in some report that sat on a dusty shelf, but in fact, it has been well received. It is the blueprint for the group of senators who are negotiating a bipartisan plan for the budget. And like everyone, I don't agree with every single recommendation in that report, but I have in fact supported the bipartisan effort, and I think there is a lot of good things in that report and a very strong way to reduce our debt in the long term. But this week, Mr. President, we are scheduled to vote on the Ryan budget. If it wasn't already crystal clear, this vote will show that a comprehensive solution to our fiscal challenges cannot be achieved by drawing ideological lines in the sand. When the Ryan budget was first rolled out, some hailed it as courageous. But I have to ask how it can be called courageous when it protects the $4 billion a year we give to oil companies, fails to address some of the military, the defense spending that even Secretary Gates has said could be cut. Instead, the House passed its budget on the backs of the middle class and the seniors. Now, in Minnesota, we don't call that courageous. But before we get into the policy, it's worth to take a step back and look at the numbers. According to the Congressional Budget Office, our debt is currently projected to reach 67% of gross domestic product in 2022. But under the Ryan plan, debt would actually reach 70% of GDP by 2022. So despite $4.3 trillion in drastic cuts, two-thirds of which would come on the backs of the middle class, the plan barely reduces deficits at all over the next decade. Despite the fact that the budget does not achieve what it sets out to accomplish in deficit reduction, leaders in the House continue to try to frame the debate in terms of numbers. That is because when you take their plan to the American people and you ask them, are these your priorities? Are these your values? The resounding answer is no. The American people want a reasonable, bipartisan plan that addresses our serious challenges. That House Ryan budget is not the answer. What this debate boils down to is not where we need to get, but how we will get there. I believe we need to reduce this debt, and I believe we can reduce that $4 trillion in the next 10 years, and I believe there's a much better way to do it than we see in the Ryan budget. Now, it may look like this plan to end Medicare that they passed in the House is reducing health care costs, but it only does so by ending Medicare as we know it. This plan would gradually replace Medicare with a system of vouchers that seniors could use to help buy private health insurance. This would put private companies in control of health benefits and cause seniors to pay more for their health care or get fewer benefits. Because the voucher will fail to keep pace with increases in the cost of health care, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that seniors and the disabled would pay sharply more for their Medicare coverage under the Ryan plan, an average of $6,359 more in the first year, more than double the cost under current law. Now, defenders of this plan say that it won't affect anyone who is over 55 and that Medicare will be available for then. Unfortunately, this isn't true. The Ryan plan would repeal the part of the health care reform law that closes the Medicare prescription drug donut hole. This is the gap in coverage, Mr. President, where seniors have to pay all of the cost of their prescription drugs. Currently, that number is a little over $3,600. This would mean that seniors would have to pay much more out of pocket for their prescription drugs. In Minnesota, that would cost our seniors $40 million in 2012 in additional drug costs alone. I believe that we must do all we can to rein in health care costs. Minnesota has always been a leader in providing low-cost, high-quality health care, and I believe we can be an example of how we can reduce health care spending while still delivering excellent care to patients. For instance, if the spending per patient with chronic diseases everywhere in the country mirrored the efficient level of spending in the Mayo Clinic's home region of Rochester, Minnesota, Medicare would have saved $50 billion over 5 years, Mr. President. They would have saved $50 billion over 5 years by using the Mayo model, some of the highest quality care in the world. So, yes, there are ways we can better deliver health care, not only for less costs, but also for better results. Medicare must continue to institute further reforms, including the creation of accountable care organizations, reductions if there are high readmission rates, bundled payments, a focus on fraud. These reforms are meant to incentivize our doctors and hospitals to provide high-quality, efficient care. The radical changes to Medicare that are proposed in the Ryan budget are not solutions to our long-term debt. There is a way to get the country on a better fiscal path, one where you're not doing it on the backs of seniors. Now, you would think if you were going to take such a drastic step as ending Medicare as we know it, you would put most of your savings toward deficit reduction. Instead, Mr. President, the Ryan budget uses its $4.3 trillion in savings for $4.2 trillion in tax breaks that disproportionately go to the wealthiest Americans. Instead of putting that money into deficit savings, it disproportionately puts the money in the pockets of the wealthiest Americans. At the same time, the House Republican budget is disproportionately targeting seniors and the middle class. It leaves the Pentagon, that makes 20% of the budget, virtually untouched. Defense Secretary Gates himself has mapped out several smart cuts and alternatives we can make to the defense budget to save a net $78 billion over the next 5 years. In the spirit of shared sacrifice, I cuts to defense spending to Mr. President. This basically comes down to values. Look at what we could save here. We could save $240 billion, simply by negotiating prescription drug costs under Medicare Part D. $240 million over 10 years. You can save $4 billion annually. That's $40 billion over 10 years by taking away the tax breaks of the oil companies. You can save $78 billion with the defense cuts I just discussed. You can bring the tax rates back to the Clinton levels for people making over $1 million. Even if you set it at $1 million, Mr. President, you save $360 billion over 10 years. That's real money. That's a budget that's based on values that protect the middle class. Mr. President, when I talk to the people of my state, they want a plan that has shared sacrifice, that's reasonable, and that's bipartisan. They want a balanced and a reasonable approach. They want us to come together on a plan that will strengthen our country. I look forward to continuing to work across the aisle to make this happen, but unfortunately, that is not what this Ryan budget is about. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Montana.
Mr. President, I ask consent to speak for 5 minutes as if in morning business.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I rise today to call for a change of course in Afghanistan. On May 1st, a targeted strike by U.S. forces achieved a central goal of the war that began in Afghanistan nearly a year ago. The death of Osama bin Laden by no means ends the threat posed by al-Qaeda or other terrorist groups. However, bin Laden's death provides an opportunity for Congress and the White House to assess a new strategy for keeping America safe and defending our interests around the world. Today, I'm calling for 3 changes to our strategy in Afghanistan. First, we must begin handling responsibility over to Afghan forces and bring most of our troops home by the end of next year. Second, we should focus on fighting terrorism, not nation building. And third, our efforts to keep America safe from terrorism should center on where most terrorist threats come from, Pakistan. The United States should not be doing the work that Afghans should be doing for themselves. The Afghans need to stand up and take responsibility for the security of their own country. The President has announced that this July will mark the beginning of a transition of security responsibility to Afghan forces. However, in my view, the transition plan is too slow. We need to begin handling responsibility of security to Afghan forces immediately and aim to have most U.S. combat troops out of Afghanistan by the end of next year. We should leave behind only small force necessary to hunt down and kill terrorists in Afghanistan and help the Afghan military perform their duties. We Americans are fortunate to have the best military in the world. These brave men and women continue to do everything we ask of them. They have spent almost 10 years fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. Many of our troops have spent multiple years deployed overseas, hiking over frigid mountains, traversing hot deserts with heavy loads on their backs, years apart from their families. But you don't hear these troops complain. These Americans continue to serve, to fight, and to die for a country we all love. Seeing these troops in action during my visit to Afghanistan last year was truly remarkable. Very impressed. This unwavering commitment has come, however, at a great price. As of today, 1,219 troops have been killed in Afghanistan. 11,411 have been wounded. 9 Montanans have died, and 50 Montanans have been wounded fighting in Afghanistan. These Montanans hail from small towns like Hungry Horse, Darby, Shepherd, and Troy. Behind each of these fallen warriors are dozens of broken hearts in their families and communities. Thousands more will suffer their entire lives with post-traumatic stress disorder or traumatic brain injuries that have thus far gone undetected. These brave troops continue to fight because we ask them to, and because they love their country. I receive letters from their families all the time, like this one from Janice Roberts from Malta, Montana. Janice writes, "Our 27-year-old son is being sent on a 3rd combat deployment mission to Afghanistan. This is his 2nd ordeal in less than a year. Our son has not even recovered emotionally or mentally from the last 2 deployments. Truthfully, the only people who care about what is happening to our young troops are the military families," end quote. This letter is a sacred reminder that we have a sacred obligation to our troops and their families. Any mission we ask of them to accomplish must be vital, absolutely vital, to American national security. And it is time that we demand that the Afghans shoulder more of the load. Afghan police forces stand at 285,000. In 2010, the Afghan National Security Forces grew by 70,000. We have spent 10 years training them. It is time for the Afghans to do the job we've trained them to do. As we draw down in Afghanistan, the Afghans will have to step up. And as we withdraw, they will have the task of governing their own country. The Afghans will develop Afghan solutions to Afghan problems, and that is the way it needs to be. Second, we need to invest more in killing terrorists and less on nation building. The raid that killed bin Laden relied on years of perseverance by intelligence officers, expensive surveillance technology, and the best special operations forces on earth. We need to continue to make investments in these capabilities to see that other terrorists face the same fate as bin Laden. As we invest more in counterterrorism capabilities, we do so knowing full well that we are facing enormous challenges at home. The United States government's total debt exceeds $14 trillion. Mr. President, I ask consent to proceed for another 5 minutes, and I will not ask for another extension.
Without objection, so ordered.
And I thank my good friend for being so helpful here. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mike Mullen, has described the U.S. debt, quote, as the biggest national security threat, end quote. Since September 11, 2001, we have spent over $1.2 trillion in Iraq and Afghanistan. Just think of that, $1.2 trillion. Every month, we spend $10 billion in Afghanistan. This is roughly 1 out of every $7 we spend on defense. This level of spending is simply not sustainable. We should focus on the core mission that has led us to Afghanistan to begin with, that is, keeping America safe from terrorism. Finally, and most important, our fight against global terrorism must begin with a focus on Pakistan. In 2008, then CIA Director Michael Hayden said, quote, "Let me be very clear today. Virtually every major terrorist threat that my agency is aware of has threads back to the tribal areas of Pakistan," end quote. A State Department report last summer reiterated this assessment and found that al-Qaeda's core in Pakistan remained the most formidable terrorist organization targeting the U.S. homeland. We have invested enormous sums to build an effective partnership with Pakistan to fight terrorism. Since 2002, the United States has provided over $18 billion in foreign assistance to Pakistan, the highest of any other country in 2009 except Iraq and Afghanistan. Yet it is no secret that Pakistan plays a double game. And Osama bin Laden's hideout location raises serious questions. I recently called upon Secretary of Defense Gates and Secretary Clinton to take a hard look at whether Pakistan is doing enough to find and kill terrorists in its own country. I will not support providing funding to Pakistan until I review this assessment. I'm gravely concerned about the commitment of Pakistan's military and intelligence services to fighting terrorism. During a visit to Pakistan last year, we made it clear to President Zardari and General Kayani that Pakistan must do more to eliminate safe havens within their own borders. We cannot accept excuses. We need results. Without progress in Pakistan, we cannot succeed in Afghanistan. But the sad irony is our large troop presence in Afghanistan actually makes it harder to press Pakistan to crack down on terrorists and militants. Most of the fuel, food, and ammunition for our troops in Afghanistan are imported through Pakistan. As long as we depend on the port of Karachi for our supplies, we have limited leverage on Pakistan to force an end to this deadly double game. To effectively defend our nation against terrorism, we need to begin withdrawing from Afghanistan and focus more on Pakistan. Our military could do almost anything we ask it to do, but it can't do everything. To meet the growing challenges around the world, we need to start bringing our troops home from Afghanistan this July and complete the withdrawal by the end of next year. We need to work together to make the 21st century the American century, to focus on jobs, improving education, rebuilding roads and bridges, and making the American economy the best place to do business in the world. The death of Osama bin Laden marks a turning point in history. We must take advantage of this opportunity to chart a new course in Afghanistan. I salute the brave men and women who made this day possible and continue to serve overseas. My thoughts are with the hundreds of Montanans serving in the armed forces. May God bless America, and may He keep our brave troops safe. President, I again thank my friend for yielding time. I yield the floor.
President, under the previous order, the senator from Kentucky is recognized for an hour.
I come to the floor today to speak about the Patriot Act. I think it's a shame that we're not going to be debating or having any votes on this, particularly since it was promised by our leadership. I would like at this time to yield the floor to my good friend Senator from New Mexico, if he'd like to make a few remarks.
Mr. President.
New Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me just say to my colleague from Kentucky, Senator Paul, I very much appreciate him yielding a little bit of time here, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of his statements on the Patriot Act. I know that this is an issue that's close to his heart. I know I served with his father in the House, and I know he was very passionate on this issue. I know this is an issue that the senator from Kentucky campaigned on and has great passion about this and has brought this to the floor, and I very much appreciate that and would like to work with him on this. I can tell you, first of all, that when we call it the so-called, and I put it in quotes and call it so-called Patriot Act, this is not a Patriot Act. Patriots stand up for the Constitution. Patriots stand up for freedom and liberty that's embodied in the Constitution. And I think true patriots, when they're public servants, stand up and do what's right, even if it's unpopular. And one of the things that I talked about a little bit earlier today was how the Patriot Act became law. I was over in the House of Representatives serving with the senator from Kentucky's father, and remember well what happened on 9/11 with the planes going into the Twin Towers up in New York, and then shortly after a plane coming into the Pentagon down here in Washington, and how we were all horrified at this incident and what had happened. And what transferred on this piece of legislation, this act, this bill that later became law, the so-called Patriot Act, is everybody became so concerned that they decided that we couldn't, the institution, the Congress, we couldn't debate it. We had to just pass a piece of legislation we hadn't even read. So we didn't have committee hearings. We didn't have all the people that normally would be brought into the process that understand the Constitution. We didn't do any of that. Within a matter of weeks after 9/11, we brought a bill to the floor of the House of Representatives without the normal preparation, and basically everybody was told we just need to pass this. I remember one senator, one representative at the time waving a piece of paper and saying there's only one copy of this on the floor and it's hot off the press. And he had a piece off from the Xerox machine that was still hot. And those were the circumstances in which we voted, and that's how we got the Patriot Act. So the so-called Patriot Act. What's happened since then? You would think, and as Senator Baucus, my colleague here from Montana, talked about the capture of Osama bin Laden. We've been into Afghanistan. We've displaced the Taliban government. We've eliminated the training camps. We've decimated al-Qaeda. We've captured bin Laden. So we've done all of these things, but one thing we haven't done is come back and revisit the Patriot Act. Take a really hard look at it and say, is it working or is it not? And allow senators, all of the senators that are here, have the opportunity to offer amendments. And I know the senator from Kentucky has several amendments he would like to offer. I have an amendment that really focuses on what's happened here today in the last couple of days. We had an extension. We thought we were going to have debate. Because of the gridlock and everything that goes on here, we got jammed up. My amendment would say, let's not extend this for 4 years without open debate. It would say, let's take 3 months, do another extension, and really focus on the idea that when that 3 months is up, we're going to be allowed the time to open this up, to have debate, to have discussion, to have very knowledgeable individuals that serve on the Judiciary Committee. I believe the presiding officer serves on the Judiciary Committee. Others serve on the Judiciary Committee, have the expertise, have all of that expertise, have it come to the floor. I'm on an amendment with Senator Leahy, which is a very good, solid amendment that has to do with various aspects, and I would hope we could get that to the floor. So we all have amendments, but we're jammed up in this process now, and the amendment that I would propose is that rather than 4 years, for 3 months, what we do is organize ourselves so that we can come back, we can have the debate, we can have an open amendment process, and then move on to whatever we move on to, but at least the Senate has worked its will. I mean, we are told over and over again, and I always learned that in my civics class, that the Senate is the greatest deliberative body. Well, if we're a great deliberative body, we have not focused that deliberation on one of the most important things in our society, and that is our liberty and our freedom that's enshrined in the Constitution. I find it a little bit ironic in a way that the contrast we have today in the Middle East, we have many of these countries where the people of those countries are striving for more freedom, striving for more democracy, and we're supporting that effort. With President Obama, many members of the Senate, many members of Congress are saying we think this is a good idea, that there's more, there's a striving for more freedom. But here on the floor of the United States Senate, we aren't willing to analyze what this so-called Patriot Act has done to our freedom here in the United States of America. Now, let me just mention a couple of things that I think are, this isn't just my view, there's an independent view as to why the Patriot Act needs to be examined, why the Patriot Act needs this open debate, needs deliberation. In March of 2007, the Justice Department Inspector General came out and took a look at how the Patriot Act processed the national security letters. As the senator from Kentucky knows, a national security letter doesn't have court supervision. The FBI can issue a national security letter, an official in the FBI, without that kind of supervision. And the Inspector General concluded that there was abuse, that there was some serious abuse within the Department of Justice as to how the FBI and other officials were using national security letters. And I put that information in the record earlier this morning, but it highlights serious problems from an Inspector General. We haven't looked at that. We haven't debated that. We haven't allowed amendments on that national security letter, and I know the senator from Kentucky, I think, has one on that he's going to be talking about in a little bit. Secondly, an independent branch of our government, the courts, have looked at the Patriot Act, and several courts have found provisions of the Patriot Act unconstitutional in terms of the Fourth Amendment, in terms of the First Amendment, and many of those decisions are working their way up through the courts. It's only prudent that we, as the United States Senate, take a look at those rulings, analyze what the courts are saying, and then come back to this so-called Patriot Act and see if we need to make changes based on what the courts have told us. We've had those rulings. We haven't taken a look at them. So we are at a point where we need deliberation. I very much appreciate the senator from Kentucky speaking out on this issue. I would just conclude today and yield back to him that Benjamin Franklin used to say when it was about, he used to talk about our freedom and liberty that was in the Constitution, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he would say, those who would sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither. Very powerful statement by one of the founders of our democracy. And so with that, I thank the senator from Kentucky for yielding me some time and look forward to hearing his comments on the floor and look forward to working with him so that we can get an open, deliberative process here that will really serve America and move us towards the deliberative process I think that we all want. I yield the floor.
The senator from Kentucky has